Jimmy Dore just gave an excellent strategy for how progressives can force a Medicare for All vote on the House floor. And that is they just need to get together now that there's more of them. And there's many others who are not, quote unquote, progressive, but they say they support Medicare for all. Well, let's find out for sure. Let's find out. Let's see them actually put a bill on the floor and vote yes or no. Let's find out on the record who is for Medicare for all, who is for the American people during a pandemic, a medical pandemic. We would like to know. And the way to do that is to get together and say to Nancy Pelosi, we will not vote for you to be Speaker of the House unless you put this bill on the floor for a vote. Force her. Use your power. Finally, at some point, use your power and say to Mama Bear that you are not going to support her anymore unless she does the one piece of legislation that every progressive is for. Every progressive. I mean, a lot of us progressives, we differ on XYZ things, right? Some of us, we differ in some ways. But the one thing we don't differ on, the one big thing we do not differ on is Medicare for all. We all agree Medicare for all is a human right, that this country, which is supposedly a wealthy country and an advanced country, cannot be the last country on earth to give its citizens health care, guaranteed health care. We are the last Western nation to do this. Mexico is going to do this before us. Vietnam, where my family's from, they're going to do it before us. This is absurd. So we need Medicare for all. And majority of American people support this. The only people who don't support this are big pharma, the insurance lobby. They're the ones who don't want this to happen. They've been lobbying our lawmakers. They've been putting out advertisements on Fox News to brainwash people into believing that if we all got Medicare for all, somehow, some way, they, for whatever reason, the person sitting there watching the ad wouldn't have health care, as if that makes any sense at all. But they're good at brainwashing. We know this. We know that the lobbies are great at brainwashing. We know that congressional leaders are great at brainwashing. And so they brainwashed Americans. But the fact is the majority have seen through the bullshit. And they have said, no, we want Medicare for all. We are in a medical pandemic. This is what I don't understand. These guys are sitting there and they're passing marijuana legislation, which, look, hey, great. I do think it should be decriminalized. I believe it should be legal in every state in the union. But now I don't think is the time to be discussing legalizing marijuana. Now is not the time to be raising military pay. Now is not the time to talk about even defunding the police. Now is the time to be talking about how do we build up our medical infrastructure to where it works for every American. How do we do this? Because we are in a medical pandemic, so this would be the time to utilize any power we've got as progressives in Congress and to band together and say, we're finally going to flex our muscles and we're going to force you to a vote. And the way to do, the thing is that progressives and anybody with big, bold ideas in Congress. Now, there are a few outliers who are willing to do this, but a lot of progressives together, for whatever reason, they're afraid to lose, right? They don't want to lose. They say, oh, no. And this is what the Democratic establishment has been able to do. They've been able to gaslight all of us into believing that the greater existential crisis is this other guy. After Trump is gone, what are they going to do? Who are they going to blame? Because, it was Bush. And he's a warmonger. This is as bad as it gets. Even though they voted every single time for war, they voted every single time to increase the military budget every single time. And even these last 4 years, what have they done? Every time Trump has said, I'm going to remove troops, they've put out legislation to say, no, you're not. No, you're not. You can't, not without our approval or not without the approval of the Secretary of Defense. And by the way, that guy's a warmonger. So they are not progressive, these Democrats. They're not for the American people. Both sides are the same. I know people say to me, don't both sides this. One is worse than the other. No, actually, I don't believe that. I don't believe one side is worse than the other. I think that it just depends on what morality they're able to speak to you. One side says, oh, no, it's baby killers. If you vote for them, baby killers. And then they kind of stop that, notice, because more Republicans, the base is changing. Back in the day, Republicans really, the moral torch they carried was religion. And so they said, religion, God said, and therefore we cannot have. And you're a heathen if you believe in these things that are against God, gay marriage and women's reproductive rights, So they would carry this around. But the problem is that Republicans, the youth, are no longer as religious. Religion has fallen out of favor. So young Republicans aren't really into religion, and they're not carrying that moral torch. You notice this, right? Democrats, on the other hand, have picked up this moral torch, and it's a new religion. It's not, quote unquote, a church or a religion, but it's a new religion. And it's this, we're fighting racism, and everybody over there is a bigot and a racist and a sexist. And if you're on that side of the aisle, then you're one of them, and we can't associate with you. And that is what happened during the 80s and 90s, and probably before that. I only remember the 80s and 90s, when the Republicans would do that same thing. I remember as a kid in the 90s, I had friends say that they could no longer play with me because I wasn't their religion, or I wasn't a good Christian kid, because I came from a family that's Catholic, but not that Catholic. We didn't really go to church and stuff. And so my friends would say to me, oh, my mom says I can't hang out with you anymore because you don't belong to our religion. You're not a good Christian girl. So they would isolate and they would ostracize, I should say, people who did not agree with them, and they would point at them and say they're heathens and we don't want anything to do with them. That was really popular with the Republican religious right wing. And now with the Democratic Party, we're seeing that happen with the base of Democrats, where they say, no, that other side is so immoral and so abhorrent that if you associate with them at all, then you are siding with the devil. Right? They go down this road. And that is how the political elites have kept us from things like Medicare for all. Because if they can keep us divided, they conquer and they win. That's how they do it. So they say, well, our big money interests, they get to remain shielded because you guys are focused on these morality squabbles, and you guys think that the other side is evil and it's an existential crisis if they win. And so, that way they can hide their donors behind all of that, and they can get all of us to fight with one another. And that's what they have done. And so the Democratic Party, the progressives, have fallen into this trap. This was my big beef with the progressive movement in this last election cycle, was in 2016, they seemed to ignore. It was kind of this, look, we don't want to get into identity politics. We just want economic policies that are going to be for the people. And then here we fast forward to 2020, and they said, how dare you be a class reductionist? That is not the issue of our time. The issue is racism and bigotry and sexism, and that's what we have to fight. And so they don't push back. They don't push back and say, look, we are going to cause you to lose unless you actually put legislation forward that's for the people, that actually makes a difference. They say, we can't do that because now is not the time. That's the excuse we get. Now is not the time. We can't afford to lose, because if we lose, then they win. And if they win, then all hell breaks loose. The evil heathens that are against the right and wrong. We are the light, and we're the ones that are saving the morality of the country. That's what Republican religious right-wingers said for years. And now it's switched, and this is how they get us from progressive ideas. And it's strategic why it's switched. It's switched because the progressive movement was actually growing, and populism on the right is actually growing, and both of those agree on a lot of things. They agree on Medicare for all, agree on ending the endless wars, agree on not wanting the free speech and censorship to be part of our daily lives. They don't, Rand Paul was filibustering the Patriot Act. Rand Paul, the Republican, filibustering the Patriot Act, saying it's the unpatriotic Patriot Act. So you've got people on both sides of the aisle who actually agree on a lot of things. But the establishment, they keep us divided with one another. They want us to believe that the other side is a immoral heathen and that the devil wins if they take control. So that is why these progressives have been unwilling to wield their power as a caucus and say to the Democratic establishment, you either put that vote on the floor or we're not voting for you, Nancy Pelosi. And yes, we have the courage to lose, to allow you to lose, and to let Kevin McCarthy become Speaker of the House. They have to be willing to have the courage to lose. And believe me, there will be times they do. And you know what? That's what it takes. This is why, for me, I've been saying, I think Joe Biden winning was the worst thing to happen to the progressive movement. It was the worst thing to happen, because now you've got the establishment in power and they're fortifying themselves. They're saying, we had Bernie Sanders rise up in 2016 and Donald Trump rise up again. So rise up in 2016. So what do we got to do? We got to get in there and we got to fortify. We got to make sure that doesn't ever happen again. And that's what they're attempting to do now with the Joe Biden administration, as you notice. That's what they're attempting to do. They want to squash any of this populism and progressivism that's rising up. They don't want that. They want the return to the establishment, as we're seeing with everybody Joe Biden is putting in his cabinet. He's getting the old gang back together, the old Obama gang back together. It's like he has no new ideas because he doesn't. So progressives have to be willing, not just gutsy enough to risk losing. You actually have to be willing to lose. And that's a really tough thing for people to stomach. They feel like, no, we can't, because again, it's that morality of, oh gosh, but then the evil will win. And the end of the day is growth is painful. In order to win, you have to go through these painful moments. And you've got to think long-term strategy, not short-term strategy. And so saying, well, okay, we're not going to force Nancy Pelosi to a Medicare for All vote. We're instead just going to let her win and, be speaker. That is how you continue losing. In the long run, that's how the American people lose. Because we don't have anybody willing to risk. You have to be willing to go out onto that battlefield and possibly lose. That's what they've got to do. So Jimmy Dore had an excellent strategy. I encourage every progressive who's got a voice to continue to amplify this idea so that we can get the progressives actually in the House to do the job that it takes. And that is force Nancy to lose, or unless, we got to put it on her. Unless she puts that vote for Medicare for All on the floor, no Speaker of the House for you, lady. We're at a medical pandemic, and this is what the majority of Americans want. Do you work for the American people or do you not? Oh, no, I forgot. You're too busy eating ice cream and getting a haircut.